You are listening to an episode of Megan is Not a Parent But. And today's episode is brought to you by Positive Parenting Class Pass. Positive Parenting Class Pass are 6 simple positive parenting classes to kickstart your positive parenting journey. You can start today at bekindcoaching.com/classpass. In today's episode, we'll be talking about 3 factors that may impact the attachment bond. So I invite you to get cozy, grab your notebook, and let's dig in. All right, friends, where we're starting today is where we left off last week, is just really beginning to open ourselves up and investigate what impacts that attachment bond. We've gone over the qualities of attachment. We've gone over that we are rooted in building trust or not trust, those actions, and that the attachment is about the child having a need, the child communicating that need, the parent interpreting and filling that need, and then doing that cycle over and over again. So we've talked about how the adult caregiver can show up in ways that builds trust and how the adult caregiver shows up in ways that hinders or may rupture trust. And again, this is all building off of the foundation of attachment theory. So attachment theory is not the same as attachment parenting. And we dug into that inside of season 5, episode 27, when I introduced the difference of them. And that attachment theory is really about being that safe place for the child to land and launch from. So is the child asking and answering themselves, does the child have a sense of safety to land and launch with their caregivers when they're feeling stress, when they're feeling overwhelmed, when they're having bouts of distress? Are they able to bring it to their caregivers, reconcile that, be soothed, feel safe, feel seen and secure, and then launch back out into the world from them? And inside of this practice, sometimes we start to think like, oh, it has to be done a certain way, or it's got to look a certain way, or it's got to have certain elements, or it's got to be done in perfection. And I want you to know that that is not true at all. That part of this practice is making the mistake. And inside of those mistakes, it's asking ourselves, what is the quality of the repair work with the caregiver, and then the repair work between the caregiver and the child. And that's the process here that is building that attachment so that we are safe to make mistakes and build in that rupture and repair. Rupture meaning the mistake made, the separation, and then the repair is that reconnection. And I had an example of this yesterday. And it's September 27th now, but yesterday I had a speaking event. And the speaking event was with parents all around the country. It was a paid speaking event partnering with a nonprofit called the Wounded Warrior Project. And I was so excited for this. I had everything prepared for it. And I had turned off all of my notifications, my calendar notifications to notify me. I had silenced my phone and I missed the speaking engagement. And I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it. I was just like, holy smokes. An email came through and was like, hey, are you able to log on? And at the time, the speaking event was from 11 to 1. And it was 11:20. When I went to go log on to the meeting, it had been closed. I just reached out to them, offered my sincere apology and take accountability for the mistakes I made. And then we, throughout the day, worked together to repair that rupture. And I had to do that work for myself first. So that feeling of that, oh shit moment, I wasn't the safe person to land. I wasn't the safe person to be dependable on. I was the person who made the rupture. And then do that work to repair with myself and with the organization and the community. And actually, through this process, me and my contact there, we repaired together. There was a moment of just true openness and honesty and just forgiveness, self-forgiveness, self-compassion, so that we can reconnect and have it rescheduled for next Monday. And that I was just really sitting with it all day and just thinking about how truly this work is done in those spaces, those messy moments. And you hear me talk about them often, that that's where these tools come to play. And for me yesterday, going through that whole journey of like this really big oh shit moment and doing that work to repair and offer compassion for myself so that I could repair with myself and then repair with the community that I had hurt. And there wasn't malintention in it. There wasn't, any sort of um, punishment needed. It was just a feeling, a true feeling, and moving through it so that we could reconnect and come back together. And it got me thinking about today's talk and today about how, there are certain factors that inhibit that process, right? The process of repairing and doing that work together. And that's what we're going to be digging into today. So, in those messy moments, sometimes we lean into perfectionism, we lean into punishment, we lean into criticism, we lean into, doing further harm versus just allowing ourselves to feel the rupture and do that work to make the repair. And I was thinking about that in the lens of perfectionism. So yesterday, throughout my own rupture and repair, an old habit of mine would have been to go into being overproductive. And I would then go to be like, okay, well, I need to make sure that everything is perfect so I never make this mistake again. And, learning and making mistakes is learning through that process is, mistakes are opportunities to learn, but it's also opportunities to get curious to bandwidth, getting curious to self-care, getting curious to what other things in your life are going through a transition so that you can be gentle with yourself and not, force yourself into being overproductive to force that perfectionism. And it got me thinking about this pressure that sometimes we put on ourselves that everything has to be done perfect and how unattainable that is. And so when we're thinking about these cycles of, needs, filling the needs, being curious to the needs, and building this trust, sometimes those cycles, we start to think about them as that they always have to be perfect. We always have to show up to do the right thing, and we always have to show up to make sure that it's done correctly, or, making sure that we say the right thing. And I hear it in parents that come to work with me. They say, to me, it says, well, I don't know what to say there, or I don't know what to do there. I just want to make it right, or I just want to make sure that I'm doing it good. And those are signals to me, like little flags that say, hey, we're focused on making sure that we are doing this within the lens of perfection, where we're not valuing the mistakes, where we're not valuing the lessons learned there, or the needs that need to be met within those mistakes. We're not valuing the rupture. And when we don't value the rupture, then we don't value repair. And really that magic is in both that dance of rupture and repair. So if we're just focused on perfection, I just want to do like a quick check-in. If you've felt that way, if you've felt like, okay, everything has to be right, or everything has to be perfect, or I have to make sure that I do this the right way and I never make a mistake, I just want you to like check in real quick and ask, like, how does that feel in your body? And how does that feel to you to have that be the expectation? If the expectation is perfection, what does that feel like? For me, it feels pressured, feels like I feel like tense, it feels tight, and like I start to avoid taking risks. Jessica here on Zoom says exhausting. Yeah, it's exhausting. And then I think if we're valuing perfection and we enter into that rupture, sometimes we just get off track and we think like, well, if I can't do it perfect, then fuck it, I'm not even going to try. And someone once told me, this lane of perfectionism, imagine if you were like driving to work and you ran one red light and you just were like, well, I'm just going to ignore all the lights and just keep driving. That's sometimes what happens in our relationships. If we didn't do it perfect, if we didn't meet our own expectations, then we're like, forget it. I'm not even going to do it anymore. I'm not even going to try. There's no worth. There's no value in trying because I can't get it right. And then when that happens, what I've noticed is that then we just miss the cues. We just continue to miss the cues. And again, if we're valuing that too, like again, check in. If like we tried it once and it didn't go how we planned, or maybe we've been having like a good cycle and we're like, wow, things are clicking, things are really going well. And then this mistake happens and we get off track. Think about how that feels. I think when I think and tune into what that feels in my body, it feels like discouragement. It feels like disappointment. It feels frustrating, and I get almost a little bit of ragey, where it's like, well, I tried it and it didn't work, and there's no use in me trying it again. And I just stop. I just go offline. And again, when we're valuing perfection over becoming curious to those ruptures and repair and doing the work through those ruptures, what we're going to start to see are patterns where we make our target and patterns where we miss our target. So there's times where we're learning through the process of doing. So it's finding that balance of being able to stay curious and meet those needs and fill those needs. And when there's ruptures and you don't do it, or you make a mistake, or you get off track, how you can come back and get back on track so that it's overall a net positive. Again, when we're talking about positive parenting, that's what we're talking about here, is that the overall net is positive. It has a positive impact. And that doesn't mean perfection. So when we take that and we start to embody that this process in life, this process in using these tools is the process of sometimes making it and being like, dang, yeah, scored it, aced it, 100%, awesome. That feels good. That feels confident. And making the mistakes and making it where we miss the mark and rupturing. And so it's finding that balance. And when we tune into that, giving yourself permission to make mistakes, giving yourself permission to not get it right, giving yourself permission to becoming curious, to building those skills. Now I ask you and tune in, like, what does that feel like? If you know that there's going to be mistakes, if you know that you're going to have these moments of anger or these moments of frustration, and building in those confidence, building for those skills for confidence and all of that together, like, what does that feel like in your body? And I think about that, like giving myself permission to make mistakes, giving myself permission to be curious through them, giving myself care and gentleness and compassion through those really hard moments. Then I start to think, well, now I feel excited. Now I feel motivated. Now I start to feel courageous and brave. And it feels like at the end, I'm going to start to feel proud, knowing that part of the process is this rupture and repair. And so I ask you and invite you to tune in, when we're shifting away from perfection and shifting into process, and knowing that mistakes are part of the process, can you start to feel the shift in you and in your mindset and in how you would approach this work and this method and this concept of attachment and relationship differently, if we know that we're no longer valuing perfection? And I think that process, that switch, is what we're digging into today, because that switch and that nimbleness with our mindset, with our body, with our emotions, is part of building in that secure attachment with ourselves and others. And so really what we're talking about today is 3 factors that influence the attachment. Those 3 factors that influence, where are we placing our focus? Are we valuing perfection? Are we valuing getting it right or doing it right? Or are we valuing like there's no use in trying? Or are we leaning in and valuing that There are going to be highs and there are going to be lows, and they all have purpose and value. So the three factors we're digging in today, the three factors that influence attachment, the first one is quality of caregiving. So when we're talking about that attachment bond, when we're talking about filling needs and building trust, we're going to get curious to the quality of caregiving. This is the main bread and butter of the work that I do with parents, is improve the quality of their caregiving. The second factor that influences attachment, influences that attunement to making those mistakes and repairing those mistakes, is the emotional climate of the home. We're going to get into what that is. And then the final, which will lead us into next week's topic, which is temperament. Temperament is a factor that influences the attachment, the relationship, and the bond between the parent and child, and between the home unit altogether. So as you see, the attachment or making these mistakes or the impacts of this work is not about love. Meaning, I know that you love your child. I know that you are trying, and I know that you are a good parent. These are the three core assumptions that I have in every single thing that I do. And I often like to reground into those three assumptions, because I think that it's easy to ping up like the placing the intention of love over the impact of our actions. And that's what this work is all about. When we're assessing the quality of the tools and we're assessing the quality, we're inviting ourselves into becoming self-reflective into the impact of how we're showing up. And I just want you to know that I know that if you've prioritized listening, if you're prioritizing digging into any classes or courses or working together, or that practice of becoming self-reflective, then that I know that you love your child. That's an investment of time and energy. And now we can move into just becoming curious to up-leveling the quality of those tools by assessing those toolbox and building those skills and practicing those methods. So when I talk about the quality of caregiving, what we're looking at here are 6 traits. And those 6 traits are sensitivity, positive attitude, synchrony, mutuality, support, and stimulation. And we're looking at those 6 traits. Sensitivity can be defined as responding promptly. Like, how sensitive are you to the child's needs? How sensitive are you to, tuning in? And when we're talking about attachment theory, we're primarily talking about it when we're infants, but we can start to see that these tools can translate to when we're older. So sensitivity in an infant, responding promptly, responding accurately, being sensitive to their needs, and then taking action to go into the feeling safe, feeling seen, feeling soothed, and feeling secure. The second is positive attitude. And what that is referencing is just having a positive affect and having positive affection towards the infants and the child as they grow up. Making sure that we're keeping that positive, warm lens when we're navigating these ruptures and repairs. Making sure that we are becoming aware of our nonverbal cues, the tone of our voice, our body language, our facial expressions. Those are all communicating louder than our words of affection. Those are all sending those signs and making sure that we're generally keeping it, trending upwards. Synchrony is about being in sync with each other. So this is all about having smooth and reciprocal interactions. This is about understanding and knowing the rhythms that come up throughout the day, or the rhythms that come up within your relationship, or the making sure that we're moving together. It could be about, this always, what pings up for me are just like the consistent routines. So feeding times, changing times, bathing times, bedtimes, the times of days that are patterning, making sure that we're in sync with each other through those transitions. Mutuality is about attending to the same thing. And this is about moving into having presence with each other while you're focusing on attending to the same thing. It could be, again, when we're thinking about infants, it could be about feeding times, making sure that we're using that time as quality time together. It could be about times in the car. It could be about times of play, making sure that we're having that connection point and that we're focused on the same thing. Support here is really digging into and inviting us to assess, like, that support here is providing emotional support. So when the child is in a state of stress and distress, that we're able to regulate our own selves and provide that support for the child who's in distress, the child who's fallen down, the child who's hungry, the child who's losing it, so that we're able to provide that warm place. And then the last is stimulation. Oh, my tongue twisted there. Stimulation, which is directing actions towards the infant, making sure that we're engaging them, that they have toys, that they have the right amount of stimulation, not too much and not too little. So those quality of just honest caregiving, we can start to assess it. We can start to say, hey, maybe we could be more sensitive here, or maybe we could start to become aware of how we're showing up there as a way to improve the quality. So when Mary Ainsworth, who was one of the founders of this theory, they studied parent and child interactions through an experiment called a strange situation, which is something that has been replicated many, many, many times. She started to notice that upon reconnection, so the strange situation is that they would have an infant and a caregiver in a room. The caregiver would leave the room, and then when the caregiver entered back into the room, they were curious to notice the child's interactions with that caregiver. How did they, again, make that rupture, which is the caregiver leaving, and then the repair, which is the coming back? She started to get curious to that, and she started to see that there were some traits where upon entry, if the child was upset, she started to see that the quality of caregiving, she called it displeased. So that she noticed that the adult was displeased, and it showed up in complaining. It showed up in being rigid. It showed up in being impatient and inconsistent. And that's one way that would impact that relationship together, that repair coming back together. When the caregiver, the adult, is showing signs of displeased or displeasure. It could be when the child either didn't look at them, or when the child maybe was crying or reaching for them. It's saying that, hey, when the caregiver is communicating this, it's like, we're going to assess that quality and look for ways to improve it. On the other side, she started to see things as overzealous, she labeled them. And that meant when the caregiver returned back and they were endlessly chattering. So it was just like entering and being a space where the caregiver was being overzealous in those responses and, over narrating and just, nonstop talking. This is also shows up in always entertaining. So when the child shows a little bit of signs of distress, giving them a toy or bouncing them up and down, or making sure that they are, redirected, it's constant redirection. And it also looked like offering stimulation even when the cues that it was not wanted by the child. So this could be that the child was either pushing it away or looking away, or just showing signs like, hey, it's not landing. So the child is trying to communicate, again, a need, like, hey, this is too much. I don't like it. I don't want it. And maybe the caregiver in this situation is saying things like, no, you love this toy, or this is fine. I'll move it over here, trying to, again, hook back in the child and noticing that, either too little or too much is finding that quality of saying, hey, is it landing how we want it to land? Is it making the desired response as we wanted? And if not, how can we, again, improve the quality of caregiving? Inside of this experiment, she also talked about how fear is also a quality to assess, and that when the caregiver is someone when the child fears them, how that too can impact the bond together. So fearing is, the child upon reconnection ought to want warmth and reconnection, and then be able to go back to the task at hand, right? That landing and launching. And when the child, when the caregiver, is a source of fear to the child, how the child will then start to avoid the caregiver upon that. And so again, just becoming aware when we're talking about removing fear-based punishments and fear-based parenting, we're working to assess those tools, the quality of those tools, and replace those tools by, again, assessing like, hey, is it making the desired impact that we want? Are things de-escalating rather than escalating further? Are these patterns that are happening over and over again? Are we missing the cues? Are we improving our tools and strategies so that we can start to, again, rebuild trust and security within the relationship over the course of the lifetime, which is a long time when you think about it. It's a lot of moments to have ruptures and repairs, and we're going to start to look at those moments of ruptures and repair coming back together. So quality of caregiving, that's the work that I do. That's every single thing that I put out. Everything I do is my job to help parents improve the quality of their parenting. That's why this whole podcast season 5, is really an inside out approach, because I hope I can create these episodes and be able to point back to these episodes that were really focused on the quality of caregiving. When we're talking about working with a positive parenting coach, we're assessing the tools that we're using. We're not assessing you as a person. I know you as a person are wonderful and good and have so much value and so much love. What we're here, the problem that we're looking to solve, is the quality of those tools, the impact of those tools, and looking for ways to improve the quality of those tools. And so I do that through Raising Respectful Kids, through Positive Parenting Class Pass, through the quarterly support calls in my Facebook group, through the weekly podcast. All of the spaces I hold, all of my social media spaces I hold, is to invite us into assessing, becoming self-reflective into the tools that we're using, the moments we're going through, and then improving the qualities of those tools. And when we improve the quality of those tools, then it impacts the second factor of attachment, which is the emotional climate of the home. So we're talking about the general emotional climate of the home and how that impacts attachment. We can look at things like the parental mental health. So when we think about our own parents' mental health, how that may impact the climate of our home, how we were raised, how they responded when we had mistakes, how they responded when we had successes, the general weather within the home. That's what we're talking about. And that our parents' mental health impacted our current mental health and is impacting our relationships in our home. So thinking about that, like, what is the general climate? And again, climate, if we think about climate in real life, there are climates that are going to be running a little bit hotter. There are climates that are going to be running a little bit colder, and we acclimate to those climates. However, when there's a consistent climate with little spouts of thunderstorms or little spouts of drought, we can do the work to remedy it. We can become aware and attuned to, hey, we're going through, a flood season in our home. How can we reinforce our home so that it stays safe through the course of this season? It could be a season of life. It could be a season of transition. It could be a season of growth, change. So we're thinking about climate. I invite you to, investigate and think about the climate in your home and how, just as a whole, and knowing that that emotional climate in your home is impacting the bond and connection with your child. The other factor or quality here is stress and coping. So when we're entering into those moments of distress, how are we coming back into a state of regulation? And how the levels of our stress, the impacts of the stress, our coping tools and strategies and mechanisms, how that all plays again to supporting the emotional climate of the home. Another factor is the emotional maturity of parents. This could go into emotional honesty. How open and honest were they? And then how intelligent, what was their, it's called EQ, which is their emotional intelligence, speaking to the quality of their own emotional verbiage and language. How in tune with are they with their emotions? It's the exercise that we did at the beginning, where I walked you through those exercises and then I asked you, how'd you feel? How'd that land? And we could start to see that the more comfortable we are in this exercise, tuning into our emotional climate, tuning into how we're showing up, how that is going to impact the quality of our attachment, how well we can repair and respond through the positive times and through the uncomfortable times. And then there's also systemic factors that impact the emotional climate of home. There's things like what's going on in the world news. There are things like losing a home to a weather factor or to a financial factor. There could be the impacts of systemic racism impacting the emotional climate of the home. Lots of moving factors here that are just all supporting and influencing what it's like, the temperature of what's inside. And the temperature of what's inside is important because that impacts our regulation. It impacts and is supported by the last factor of the attachment bond, which is temperament. And I like to describe temperament as, how easy it is for someone to regulate themselves. Meaning, when we think about regulation as like a thermostat, how easy is it for them to cool things down when things get too hot or kick up the heat when things get too cold? And when we're thinking about temperament, there are 3 values of temperament. It's called easy, slow to warm, and difficult. And often when parents come to me, they say, yeah, I have a really difficult child, or yeah, this behavior is very difficult, or they're just like, there's so much, they're acting this way. It's so hard. And what I really love to do is just reframe this, that easy, slow to warm, and difficult is signaling how easy or difficult of a time the child is having to regulating themselves, kicking on that thermostat. So if we think about the quality of caregiving, it influences the emotional climate of the home, and the child's temperament, how easy they are to adjust to that climate, is signaled by their temperament. So if things are running hot at home, if things are hot in anger or hot in frustration, or things are like an electric fence and a child has an easy time, they're able to regulate themselves through that. They're able to say, mom's just in a bad mood today. She's having a hard time. I know not to ask her these things. I know to, regulate myself through it. That's a child who has an easier time in those moments. A child who has a difficult time is a child who's more perceptive to those moments. That's a child who's going to dig into those moments. They're going to feel very overwhelmed in those moments because they're having a difficult time regulating themselves. That thermostat is hard for them. And in temperament, which we're going to get into next week, temperament, again, is how we're taking in information, how we're processing our environment through our verbal and nonverbals, how we're taking in that, and then what we put out. So we regulate ourselves and then we put it out as behavior. And so again, going into easy, slow to warm, and difficult, what that is signaling is how easy of a time is a child taking in information, regulating themselves, and then regulating and navigating their behavior, or how difficult of a time is a child coming in with that stimulation, regulating themselves, and putting out that behavior. And why this is so important is because I love to work with parents to improve the quality of their caregiving, because they have children who are having a difficult time regulating themselves. Often they too are having a difficult time regulating themselves because they're having a difficult temperament. Why? Because I have a difficult temperament. It takes a lot of focus. A lot of this work I teach and talk about because I'm using these tools each and every day, because this is work for me to regulate myself. This is work for me to learn these tools. And I found these tools to be successful. So then those moments like I had yesterday, going all the way back to the beginning of the episode when I talked about how I made that mistake, how I could do the work to regulate myself through it so that I didn't punish myself through it. And that's the work that I share for parents to do that each and every day in their everyday interactions with their children, so that it impacts and builds that safe, secure, seeing, soothing in relationship. It impacts the emotional climate of their home, and it impacts the connection that they have with themselves and with their child. So to recap, today we talked about those 3 factors that influence the attachment bond, the thing that we've been breaking down over the past now 11 episodes. It's a big chunk. But those factors to become curious about is the quality of caregiving. Again, you as a parent are an amazing person. You as a parent love your children. You as the parent are trying lots of different things, probably trying all the time. Working in the spaces that I work with is to improve the quality of that caregiving, improve the quality of the communication, improve the quality of the tools and structure and support that we put in place, so that we have an overall positive outcome. The other factor was the emotional climate of the home, investigating what's the weather like. Why is that important is because that impacts how the child is able to move through it and feel safe, seen, soothed, and secure within it. And temperament impacts that. It impacts how well we are of, it's called a good match. Good match meaning that the parent's temperament and the child's temperament are well matched. And if not, if it's not a good match, then how can we get into support, spaces of support to improve that, so that we can start to learn how to support the child that's in front of you. So as we move now into temperament and digging in, that's what we're talking about next week. So I want to end today by just inviting you to consider how curious you are to assess and explore the factors in your life. How curious are you to assess the quality caregiving you have and assess the other factors? What is the emotional climate in your home? What is your temperament? What is your child's temperament? Are you a good match? How can you improve those and reinforce those gaps so that you can show up in ways that communicate to the child that they are safe, seen, soothed, and secure? And as we're going through this, I just want to do a check-in and ask yourself, how is it landing with you when learning about that dance between ruptures and repairs? That it's about mistakes and what you do to repair that mistake, and how to do that in loving ways and not from a place of punishment. It takes energy, it takes focus, it takes work to do that. And we do that work for ourselves, that dance of rupture and repair, so that when we're in relationship, we understand that it's safe for others to make ruptures and invite in that repair. If you've taken notes, if you've dug into it, I love to see what you all come up with. So I invite you to share your work. If you've taken notes, I want to know. I love to elevate and call you out and celebrate your wins. And there are 3 ways to share. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts. You can share your thoughts and takeaways on social media and tag me. And you can share your thoughts inside of the dedicated posts of our Facebook community, Positive Parenting with Megan Ford. I want to take a moment and say thank you. Thank you for tuning in and staying to the end. My mission in life is to help support parents in feeling supported and empowered in doing this work. The work of improving the quality of caregiving, the work to balancing out the climate in their home, and the work to understand and support their child through regulating themselves and others. This podcast, my Facebook community, and my programs all help parents work through the phases of awareness, education, and practice. And if you are ready to take the next step, I invite you to check out Class 1 inside of Positive Parenting Class Pass, all about emotional validation. Inside of this class, it'll help you balance your parenting toolbox by helping you connect to your child in ways that helps them feel safe, seen, soothed, and secure. If you're interested in getting started today, your children could start feeling connected to you by evening. You can get started today at bekindcoaching.com/classpass. And as my free gift to you, you'll have access to Raising Respectful Kids, which we go into the 9 traits of temperament right inside there. So I celebrate you, I support you, and I cannot wait to see you next time. Bye, friends.